welcome to the Trips and Global on Wheels podcast hour, Julian.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Julian Mosi McQueen is an Oakland, California native raised in rural Northern California. He brings years of organizing, facilitation, and training experience to his role as the co-founder, training director, and lead facilitator for the Million Person Project. The Million Person Project exists to support leaders to harness the power of personal narrative to serve the most important movement of our time. In addition to his work with the Million Person Project, Julian utilizes story to help organizations explore their relationships and commitment to justice and equity so that they may ensure their structures, norms, practices, and cultures are inclusive, safe, and generative for all people. Prior to the Million Person Project, Julian was a founding member of Van Jones' nationally renowned green economy organization, Green for All. His career is fueled by a strong belief in authentic movements that are powered by people. To this end, he co-created Green for All's College Ambassador Program, which cultivates environmental leaders at historically Black colleges and universities, and launched Green for All's Fellowship Program, working to weave together and support the leadership of 135 seasoned organizers from all over the United States. In 2015, Julian was recognized by Huffington Post as one of 10 leaders reshaping the environmental movement. In 2019, he co-wrote the book, How Your Story Set You Free, published by Chronicle Books. And there it is. There's the book, Julian.
Yes, it's gorgeous.
It is. So, since a large part of your job is coaching people how to tell their story, do you mind telling your story and what identities shaped you in just 2 to 3 minutes?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Ming and Jean, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I've really been looking forward to it, so thank you so much. So my story, as it says in my bio, it starts in California. I'm California born and raised in the U.S. I started my life in the city. So my folks met in Oakland, but when I was really young, Oakland, like many cities around the United States and around the world, certainly, started to experience some issues. First, it had to do with the industries that had supported the Black middle class community that I was a part of. They started to leave, right? Those companies started to go overseas and factories started to shut down. So that was really destabilizing. And then the other major thing was that crack cocaine was, came into the community in the early 80s, which is when I was born. And so with that, my dad in particular, but both of my parents made the decision that it was going to be too hard to raise their what ended up being 3 boys in what was an increasingly unstable community. And so they moved us to a little place called Ferndale. Ferndale has more cows than people. It's about 5 hours north of the San Francisco, Oakland Bay area. So you go up the coast in California. It's in and amongst the giant redwood trees, the tallest trees in the world. They're stunning. If you haven't had a chance to see them, I recommend making that trip if you can. They're just so beautiful. Oh man, it's stunning. So, in and amongst the cows, and that's where I was raised. And so my life was a lot of back and forth between the city and the country. And so a lot of what shapes me, as you saw in my bio, was this work within the environment. But within the work around environment, it was really about people. How do we address the needs of our environment and put people to work? And I think that finds its roots in my being from the city, but being raised in the country and having a great love of both places and seeing the needs of a community like Oakland and wanting to be a part of that solution. So that's really what drives me. And, the last thing I'll say is my dad, when we would ask him, we would visit Oakland, and he was, he and my mom would always talk about like, oh, I wish we didn't have to sell our house, and if we could still have a place here and maybe we'll move back. And, they would kind of talk about that. And so we'd ask my dad, well, if you love it so much, why did we leave? And he said, I wanted you to grow up in a place where kids could be kids as long as they needed to be. I wanted my boys to just be able to focus on being children.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It sounds like you had a really fun dad.
Yeah, we hear that you've also had a lot of experience as a DJ.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I go by the name International Superstar DJ such and such, DJ such and such for short. I've had the chance to I DJ. I convinced the bar owner in Mexico to let me DJ there once, so I get to claim international now. And you know, who's to say I'm not a superstar? So that's why I go. So yeah, I love DJing. Music is a huge part of my life, and we actually integrate it when we do workshops and trainings around story stuff. There's always music. There's always movement.
Do you think that actually helps with helping tell your story and your climate activism work? Like, are there any parallels? Does it tie in with the
I love that question. What a fun question. I think that, so I would say yes, it does help. You know, and what I will say is when we do our workshop, we open with music and movement. And one of the first ways in which we have people share story is we say, we'll play a song, we'll have people move around, sort of just loosen up. We call it cover the space. They move. Sometimes people are dancing, but you're just moving, no pressure. Then we pause and we pair people up and we say, what is a musical memory that you can share with your partner? What is your first concert, a favorite show you've been to, music your parents played growing up? And immediately, just that connection to music, people are launching into these incredible stories and really profound things and stuff they haven't really shared before. And the room just lights up. So even in that, with our work specifically, but the parallel, I would say, is if we're talking about movements and if we're talking about trying to, my understanding of a movement is you're trying to, based on shared values, you're trying to get a bunch of folks to move in the same direction and to try to do something, right? And to try to affect change in some way. And I think a DJ is the same thing. A DJ is the one who's at the front of the room, and not all leaders are at the front of the room, but a DJ is. And I think it can be a useful analogy of like, what can I play that will allow people to find a rhythm together, that will allow people to find the beat, that will allow people to move together and do it joyously.
In times like these, that could be really helpful. You know, we can't have big crowds, but we do need leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we're going to dive into what you do best, storytelling. So the next few questions will be about that. What do you think is the key to telling a story that connects with people, but not only that it connects with people, because that's been proven scientifically that if you tell a good story, it connects with people on a neurological level. But how does it motivate people to act for a cause that's good for the common good?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think what moves people is authenticity and the emotion associated with that. So we really coach the people that we work with to, the first audience for your story is yourself, right? Are you telling a story that you find to be moving? Are you telling a story that you feel some energy and some emotion behind? And it can be different emotion, right? It doesn't, it can be, some of the stories that we hear in the work are like these kind of, hard stories of communities that are suffering or individuals that have had these bad things happen. So that can be part of it, but it can also be joy. It can also be anger. It can be humor, right? But are you feeling something when you're thinking about the story to share? So I think that what stirs people. So because neurologically it connects to the brain, but how do you get the heart to beat faster? How do you get to stir the heart, And I think understanding, the story you're sharing and what is meaningful about that story for yourself, first and foremost, can be a really useful measure to think about, will it connect with an audience? Will it move people? Will it inspire people? And that takes work. And that's really a process of understanding your own story, understanding the stories that shape you and also shape your passion, and being able to share some of those. And I think through that's where people find that connection. That's one of the big places, I think.
Yeah, no, that's great insight. So to summarize, basically you have to, put something on the table where you're not necessarily uncomfortable sharing, but it conjures something out of you first.
That's right. I like that
it
phrase.
rings true to you somehow. And if it doesn't, then it's that much harder to ring true to anybody else.
Yeah, and I think I'll just say one more thing about that. That's exactly right. And that conjuring something inside of ourselves like that, if you're doing it in a way that you're like, oh, well, this is a sad story and that'll connect and I don't really have any feeling behind it and I don't care and whatever, like that's going to come through, So really having that understand, and it's not to say you have to be overcome with emotion every time you share it, but like believing fully in your own heart the power of the story and understanding it and its real impact on you, right? So was that really a turning point, like for you? Like we're not searching to make that up. Like let's do the work to identify and really understand that, because again, it comes back to that authenticity. Like that's what connects. So it's not just the content of the story, but it's the emotional resonance for the audience and for yourself.
Yeah, I actually have a follow up. So I know a lot of times people are afraid to be vulnerable. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that fear is actually valid,
Yeah.
because there is such thing as oversharing and
Yeah.
sharing to a point that it does make one feel uncomfortable, and
Mm-hmm.
as they should. So how do they know when to cross that border in a healthy
Mm.
way and when it's like, whoa, that's too much?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question, and it's a tough question to answer for anyone and like for everybody, right? Everybody's different. One thing, so context really matters. So I think we really encourage people to bring their full selves to their work and their space. And having said that, if like so, okay, so let me back up. I think really having some clarity around why are you sharing the story you're sharing, right? And again, that comes down to having a clear sense of your purpose. Who are you talking to and why? What do you want them to understand about you, your work, and what you want from them? So doing the work to do that will really help you hone in and share a story. I think sometimes what happens is people have a desire, they know like stories are powerful, they connect, they need to be vulnerable. Let me just tell the most vulnerable story about myself. And it's not connected to a bigger picture. So then they find themselves out on this cliff of sharing this really vulnerable story, and everybody's sort of like, whoa, shell shocked. And there's no way back to the rest of what they're trying to say. And I've seen it happen where it's like, okay. And now we're like switching gears entirely and talking about something over here. So I think understanding why you're sharing it, a lot of power comes from that. And I think people can, if you really have an understanding of why you're sharing, even if it's really vulnerable, that can be really still very empowering. Um, the other thing I would say is, saying it out loud in the mirror, saying it to somebody you're really close to, sharing the story with somebody who already knows the story. If somebody does know the story, sometimes people don't know, sometimes the story nobody's ever shared. So that's something different. But taking the baby steps to get comfortable and say, whoa, how did that feel? That can be really important. And then the other thing I would say is sometimes that feeling of like, holy smokes, what did I just do? That is fleeting and it goes away. And then you come back to, oh, wow, and a lot of times it's like the feedback that you will get can be really helpful because they'll be like, whoa, I can't believe you shared that. Thank you. That made me remember something, or I'd never heard anybody say it like that. And that really touches me because that's how I feel about this thing that I did. Right. So that feeling, and Brene Brown calls it a vulnerability hangover. So sometimes it's just a vulnerability hangover, and you need a day to just sort of sit with it and be like, whoa, and be okay with that. Have some ice cream, sit back, be kind to yourself, applaud yourself for the courage it took to share it, whatever it might have been, and hopefully you'll come back around to understanding it. And I think if you again have a sense of the purpose and why you're sharing that story, usually you'll come back around to being like, hey, that was scary. And I still feel a little bit raw. And every time I think about it, I kind of go, whoa, but I know why I shared it and it was important to share. And I'm glad I did it.
Yeah, no, that's great.
I guess this comes from people who need to tell a story as an individual or a not-for-profit or a corporation. How would you encourage people to think about the way that they tell the story when it comes from an organization?
That's a great question. That's a big part of the work that we do. And the answer lies in values. So we talk about stories as being a really powerful vehicle for values. Part of why we share stories in a professional realm or in not-for-profit or even a corporate space is because we want to connect with people and communicate the values that we hold. And our story allows people to not only understand our values, but to understand how deeply held they are, right? When you're sharing a story of how something came to be, you're allowing people some insight into, hey, this isn't just about X, Y, or Z for me. It's really about this thing. And here's why. Here's how I learned it. Here's the things that I've gone through that helped me understand that working to ensure all communities are one where kids can be kids is central to what we need to do in this world, right? Here's my path to understanding that. when you let people in on that, those values, like that's where a lot of the power comes from, and people can connect to that. So, so you know, that is, so when we're talking about a professional setting, a not-for-profit, personal or professional, or for-profit space, you know, thinking about not just what you do, but like what are the values that underlie the work, and what are your connection to those values? So that's the personal professional connection. I am working at this place, and I know part of what this organization is about has to do with this value. And that value is really important to me, and let me share why. So, you know, when we work with organizations, we're working with people to authentically understand and identify what values they feel like the organization is bringing into the world, what is it holding up, and what's their connection and investment in that value. Why does that matter to them? Sometimes we'll do it the other way around. What are the values that guide you? And then like, are of those values, what do you see reflected in this workplace, and how can you make that connection for people? So that's kind of what we do. And you know, the last thing I'll say about that is sometimes it's not, especially if you're in like a corporate place, right? If you know, it can be a stretch sometimes to connect the product with a specific value, but how do you want to be in that place? How does that place operate? Who are the people there? What are the values that people move with within the organization? That can sometimes be a place for connection.
Wow, that's very, very useful, even just for an individual to think about, you know, what they do in their current role or in their current studies or any type of situation, to really think deeply first about how they relate to what they're doing, and it can really make a difference, because some people are, you know, hugely driven by values as opposed to their particular career or salary. Yes. Or other factors. So it's important just from an individual level to be comfortable and happy with the, I guess that the values that they hold are reflected in what they're doing.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
I guess not many people have their the ability to speak internationally, so we thought we'd call on you to ask this question. So how does storytelling differ in different countries that you've experienced?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and maybe how do people resonate differently depending on where they grew up? You know, you've got different nationalities or different upbringings, different ethnicities. Yeah, what's your experience been?
Wow, man, what a fun question. So yeah, it definitely differs throughout the world. One thing I will say is stories are universal, but certainly individual and cultures' relationship to story is different. And one of the biggest differences that we've encountered in our travels, and I would say this is true in a number of places we've been, Vietnam, very much so, the Pacific. So we've been to Fiji, Tonga, the Solomon Islands, Kiribati, these Pacific island nations. And I would say Uganda too, to a little bit lesser extent, but also, is the cultural orientation is really communal. And it's really about, people don't and aren't that comfortable and don't often speak in terms of I, right? There's much more we. And people, and this is different throughout some of these cultures, but so not quite as universal. So that's really across all of those places and more. There was this sense of like, part of our work was really interesting because our work is about personal narrative. So what's your story and the connection? And a big part of our work is also connecting that to your community and to your audience. So it's not just about you, but it is about you. So that was a really interesting navigating that with folks and helping people to feel comfortable. What is an appropriate context that you might actually use this? And in your culture, when would be an appropriate time to weave this in? How can you lead with the community part and then weave some of your personal story and maybe flipping it a little bit, right? So that was something we did. And so that's been something that we've really learned a lot from in terms of how do we tell the stories of our communities. A lot of that had to do with telling stories, particularly in the Pacific. The stories were these long epics where a lot of the wisdom that they're trying to share and a lot of the way that they're contextualizing their work, this was around climate change, had to do with generations of wisdom and knowledge and stories from aunts and uncles and grandparents and passed down. And so they're working with these longer stories of the region and of their people and the islands and weaving some of their stuff into it. And so that was really interesting.
Wow, that's incredible. I guess I wouldn't have thought that would be the first thing that comes to mind, but if my first impression is if you have a more communal sense, then it might be more important to them that, that they face things like climate change head on as a community, because it has, very, very important implications as a community.
Right,
But at
right.
the same time, if the community is already headed in one direction, it might be very hard to change that direction.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Yes.
have you seen, like, is it better or worse in terms of trying to fix the climate change problem?
Mm. Man, that's a really great question. I don't think it's either or. I don't think it's better or worse. I think it could be. You hit the nail on the head. Like that orientation is really useful, and if you're moving in the opposite direction, that's a really big challenge. And I think that's part of our challenge globally, is in order to tackle that problem, it doesn't matter what culture you're part of or what the orientation of is, if it's more individualistic or more communal. um, we need to, we all have to take steps, and we all have to be committed to it, and we have to make big change, whether that's personal choices, but even more so, the political will, and how do we, the people that work for us in the government, how do we, flex our muscle as a people to make the changes that we understand will kind of bring us off the cliff of this climate catastrophe. So we have to do that globally. So I think there's a lot to be learned from communities that really move in a communal way. And I think part of the solution to, if those communities are moving in a different way, if the culture is moving against where you're at, well, that's where story comes in, right? You have to, the story that people are being told, the story that they understand about where we are, where we're going, their fears, their dreams are not aligning with what you're trying to do. And so you need to work on the story you're sharing. It is about, how can we use the power of story to help shift cultures at a big scale? And I think that's a huge part of the climate work we all have to do.
Yeah, speaking of climate work, climate change, I think we're gonna jump to that section, Gene.
Great.
Yeah, sure. So, which environmental activist stories would you like to share, and what changes about the broader society have you noticed when they told their story?
That's a great question. Um, there's a couple folks that came to mind. So one group, I'll just speak about a group that, and I talked about our work in the Pacific. So we went to the Pacific in 2015, and this group called the Pacific Climate Warriors were coming together from I think it was 9 countries at the time, all throughout the Pacific. Um, they were coming to Fiji for 4 or 5 days of kind of, um, strategic planning and thinking about, well, what am I going to do in Fiji, and how does that align with what you're doing in the Solomon Islands, and how does that align with Kiribati, and so on and so forth. And we knew one of the organizers, that we had met them in Turkey. His name is Fintan Lutanatambua. And Fintan had come to Turkey and worked with Heather. I was actually unable, I was doing some other work. And so Heather needed a partner to train with. Fintan volunteered. She gamed Fintan up on our technique and doing what we did. And he did it. He loved it. He fell in love with it. And so when he heard that we were trying to hit the road again, he's like, come here, let's work. So we got to do 2-3 days of just deep dive of story with these folks. And there is a really strong storytelling culture in the Pacific. So some of the stories we heard were so profound and so deep and so well told. And as I said, it is a place where there's really communal storytelling, and they're telling the story from they're not centering themselves, and it's really the story of their whole community. So that was really impactful to me. And so that in and of itself was really powerful. But what was really amazing is that how they recognized immediately the power of story, and through our workshop and through their work, we're like, this is how we break through to the young people of the Pacific. It's by centering our culture, our shared history, our shared understanding of the importance of the ocean and land as is important, right? Like, if we don't have our land, we don't have anything, right? There are no Fijian people without Fiji. It's like this orientation, and that kind of permeates throughout. So their ability and how successful they've been since then of centering authentic culture, honoring Pacific culture, taking the conversation of climate change out of this sort of Western European focused space and bringing it back to their culture at a deep, deep level and saying, what are we fighting for? And not only that, what do we have as part of who we are? What assets do we carry as islanders that can help us to face this challenge? And how can we do it together? Man, it just gives me chills to talk about the way that they've been able to just harness the power of story to create these incredible actions and they've been a part of blockades, and they've stopped oil in Australia. They've been doing blockades in Australia, stopping oil from going here and there, and making global headlines doing that, and just enrolling young people to be a part of this solution and really creating change and changing the conversation entirely in these island nations, which are some of the most impacted and most vulnerable to climate change. That has been tremendous.
That's incredible. It sounds like you can really move mountains with just just telling a good story. Really
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I think that is 100% true. I will say, I mentioned working at Green for All, which was started by Van Jones and among other people, and I was on the founding team there. I was sitting in the floor of a room of a fancy house here in San Francisco at a fundraiser, and Van told this story of working in West Oakland, and which is a Black community that I'm from, and all of the kids that he had, had to bury, and the families he had to talk through that, and the kids he'd seen go to jail, and all of these things, and then talking about going just 10 miles away to Marin County, which is one of the richest counties in America, which would make it high up on the list of richest places on earth, and how much wealth there is there, and all the greenery that's there, and all the difference. And he's like, these places are two different worlds that are 10 miles apart. This is not right. What can we do about it? The way he told that story, I understood why, I understood the problem, and most importantly, I understood what I thought was a viable solution, and I understood how I could be a part of it. That was a story he told that I saw myself in, that within a year, I had beat down every door, knocked on every door, and found my way to that organization so I could work for him in service to that vision, and I was sitting on the floor of a house, and that was it. It was a 20-minute talk. And next thing you know, I'm committing my life. For 9 years, I worked at this organization based on that story that day. So that's it can move people in really profound ways.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it must have been quite a story.
Oh, it was a heck of a story. It's in the book. Just to plug my book, I tell that story in the book, and you can hear more about it. And it's a wonderful book.
Great. Yeah. Next, we're going to jump on to a few questions about people with disabilities, as that is the main purpose of this platform.
Wonderful.
Is to advocate for people with disabilities. And so Gene is going to kick off the next section.
Yeah, sure. So in your work, in your experience, have you come across people who made an impression on you where they did have a disability? And if so, how did that inspire you or change the way that you tell your stories?
So yeah, the answer is yes. And actually recently we had we were working with somebody with a disability, and it was like a, it was like a pretty severe facial, half of her face was frozen, and it was all of this stuff. And so she had a pretty very noticeable, different, her face looked very different than most people, and it was really noticeable. And, her story of how what I learned from her was both the challenges that she faced that were very real. And what was really interesting to me about her story is her interpretation and understanding of what that meant about her and her abilities. It really fueled her in some ways, and it pushed her to drive to do other things, right? And to perform in other ways. And it held her back in some ways. And so her exploration was sort of looking at both sides of that and saying, both of these things are real. And what I really admired her about this was she felt secure enough in what she had learned to really be frank about, yes, there was power in this. I learned from it. It made me do these things in different ways, and I had no choice. And for that, I learned. And it was really painful, and I allowed it to hold me back in some ways too. And I want to be clear about both of that. And so I just really, appreciated her ability to see it from all sides and to honor the ways in which she learned and grew from it, and in the ways in which it held her back. And she didn't, in some of the narratives, and sometimes, and I think this goes for sort of anything, we want to lean, it's hard to navigate the line to really honor all of the truth, right? and to be able to tell that story in a way that's accessible and real. You want to lean one way or the other. It has to be all the way this, or it has to be all the way that. And I appreciated her ability to sort of weave the stories of that together, and say, you know, this is who I am as a whole. And I learned so much from this, and it's not all there is, and it held me back, and now I'm doing this because of it, right? And again, it was about how it shaped her values too. And I think that was really important.
Yeah, it's incredible. Definitely, when people do face adversity, sometimes that doesn't always, but it can propel you to find your strengths, and also your weaknesses. But it may take maybe an interaction with the storyteller to really bring that out and get that self-appreciation of what you can accomplish,
Yeah.
even if you are facing something difficult.
Yeah.
So luckily I haven't had to go through that, but I have seen that in a lot of places where it might be that you find a strength, and then you can go on and you realize something you didn't know about yourself before. And that can be
Yeah.
as simple as starting a business that you always wanted to do, or it can be something maybe changing in the community, or just even making a small impression on someone else that helps them.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay. So I wanted to know, over the course of your work, you've been coaching people how to tell a compelling story for quite some time. Have you had the opportunity to coach individuals with disabilities to do that, to tell a compelling story? And if not, how do you think you would go about promoting that process and um, encouraging more people with disabilities to share their stories in the community and let the broader public see their value?
Yeah. So I'm thinking back through my folks. And part of what we do is workshops that are open to the public, and we always make sure to do it in a place that's fully accessible to everybody. And so we do. We've had folks come to our public facing workshops. Those are usually shorter, so we haven't necessarily gone on to like know exactly how people have shared it. But I think I think. So I'll just be frank from where I sit. Like, I feel like, as an able-bodied person, and forgive me if the language I'm using is not appropriate, and I know these things change, but that I don't have any particular physical incapacities, right? So as that, it's like the world is built for me always, and so I don't think I'm alone in this. I don't think about what is required, how much more is required of somebody who's in a wheelchair, or who I know somebody who I worked with this young man who he doesn't use a wheelchair, but he has crutches, and so it's like he's always having to change him from one hand to the other, and to get a door, and then to move it back, and then he has one leg, and so it's like, man, just getting on the bus for him is a whole nother thing, right? And he does it, and it doesn't slow him down, and he does so much more of his life. It's not all of who he is. And so I think, I feel, and I don't know if you agree, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I do feel like, there's, as there is with so many issues of justice in our world, whatever community you're a part of, I think that disability and disability rights is one that really gets swept under the rug, and is one that people just don't feel the need to address it. And it's sort of like, oh yeah, that's a bummer. And then we say, oh, well, I'm glad I don't have to deal with that. And we move on, right? And it's not okay. So I actually think storytelling is like such an important part of saying, hey, take a step out of your this land you're in, and understand where we are, and understand that your community, because we're all in community together, right? Like, this is your community, is having to deal with X, Y, and Z. Is that what you want for your community? Do you want people to have to navigate these things without support, without any clarity around a path forward, right? Like, is that what you want? So if it's not, then we need to do something together, and I need you in that, right? Like, the ability of story to sort of enroll people in, again, it comes down to values. What are the values, that you want to lift up, that people can affirm and be a part of? And sometimes it might be, hey, I'm telling you, if you're not supporting us in this, then you don't hold that value. Is that what you want to be true? You better come on. Sometimes you got to be going that route, but I will come back and say more than that. It's like, what can we create together, right? What are we making together that we can all be proud of, that we all want to be a part of? And so I think that would be it. And so in terms of the process, you know, it's no different than it is for anyone, which is what is it? And but what I do think is interesting, you know, and I'll say this, this is not just applicable to people with disabilities, but a lot of times the story that's told, rightfully so, would center around the disability. A lot of people have disabilities. Very few of those people are actively working to change the world around disability justice, right? Or around the rights of disability. So what's that story, right? And it has more to do than with whatever disability you're navigating. There's something else inside of you that's driving you to be an activist, to be vocal, to be out in front, to start an organization, to have a podcast, whatever. There's something else inside of you other than just your lived experience. Because a lot of people have wheelchairs. Very few of them are taking action and telling people, let's go, let's make change. So that's the story to uncover. Part of it might be your experience with your disability, but there's another story there. Let's hear that story too.
Yeah, no, great points. So speaking of disability justice, I will ask a question that is more advocacy on the advocacy realm. So 70%, around 70% of people with disabilities in this country, in the U.S., are unemployed, and Australia is about the same. Actually, not the same. 1 in 5 also have a disability in Australia, which is the same here in the U.S. But so on the unemployment front, that's an astounding number, percentage, by the way, which when I first heard it, 70%, I was just like, wait, that's not right. No. Did I just misread that? Anyways, so that is the case, despite what I might wish. So so I saw that your packages, your coaching packages for these storytelling, you know, for these storytelling sessions are up to the thousands. Some of them are thousands of dollars. And, you know, most people with disabilities, most people in general, would not be able to afford something like that. So would you be willing to subsidize or even do a small percentage of your time as pro bono work and helping people with disabilities, individuals with disabilities amplify their voice? As you know, entrepreneurship in the social justice realm is becoming more and more important and relevant, and something that consumers are looking for businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, and one we get often from a lot of different circles. And part of it is, you know, just some context is that we work with organizations, and so a lot of times people are using professional development budgets. But a lot of people that we work with, that's like a huge ask. And some people, you know, find a way to do it and fundraise and do GoFundMes and things like that. Some people don't. We do subsidize, so we have a number of different programs at a number of different levels, and I'll share a little bit about a few of them. And so let me just start with, we have on Facebook, we have a group called Stories Are Power. So I want to share that as a resource. What we do in Stories Are Power is every few months we do a 5-day storytelling boot camp. So Heather and I get on Facebook Live 30 minutes a day for 5 days. There's worksheets associated with it. It's really dope. It's free and it's really awesome. I'm really proud of it. So I would encourage people to sign up for Stories Are Power, or it's a Facebook group. Ask to join the group. We'll let you in and you'll have access to all of those videos and the worksheets that are associated with it. So that's a really great, like, if you're just trying to get a sense of your story and you want to uncover some of that power and see what some of the stories you might share are, that is a really powerful resource. So that's one. And then the other one, and particularly what we subsidize, is when we do group programs. And so we have a group program called Free Your Story, which is a 9-10 week program. That's $500. So it's on the lower end, but you know, we do specials with that. And also we absolutely, and we have another one that's $5,000 and it's 6 months, right? So those are 2 group programs, and we always save a couple spots to be fully subsidized. And, you know, to just offer that. And so really it's about, you know, this is how I always talk about it. When we are deciding who to work with, there are a number of boxes to check. One of those boxes is, can they pay us? Because that is an important part of that's how we make our living, right? So that's one of the boxes. It's not the only box. And so if somebody is checking enough of the other boxes about their work and what they're doing and how impactful it is, about their sometimes it's about their just desire to share their story, about their commitment to do the work, about their affirming that they have the time to actually be in the program. If they're checking enough of those boxes and they're like, hey, I'm in and I cannot do that, what can you do for me? Then we'll work with them. And sometimes it's partial and sometimes it's full. So, I would encourage your audience that's listening to, start with reaching out to us, start with Stories Are Power. And if we're offering something that you're really into, then let's be in conversation and we'll figure out how to work with you.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. I think that it would be a great start. Jean, I'm going to have you take 14 as the closing question.
Yeah, sure. I guess this very much relates to what you just said. So when it comes to making, learning how to tell your story accessible, I guess the first place you should start would be on Facebook, Google, reaching out to you directly.
So we have millionpersonproject.org, and you can reach us through that. I'll just give my email, which is Julian, Julian @millionpersonproject.org. So that's a good place to start. Stories Are Power on Facebook is another great place.
Fantastic. I guess in times like these with pandemics and lockdown, a lot of people who may or may not have a disability, that's quite easy to just reach out and learn something. Would you say that there's anything in particular that someone with any form of disability should maybe focus on first in your work or where they go to?
A couple of things are coming to me. One is like your story of like what is the story you're trying to tell, and understanding that story from multiple different angles. So really thinking about your values. It really comes back to values, and that's what I was thinking. Is like, what are the values that drive you, and try to identify 3 to 5 values that you feel are really core to who you are, and then try to think about how are those values related to whatever it is that you're trying to speak about. So if you have a project, if you have an organization, if you're doing work, if you're advocating, what are the values that you really feel like are core to who you are? Let's just say 3 of them. How would you see those as connected to what the work you're doing? Explore that, and just being able to, even if you're not a great storyteller or you haven't done the work to really uncover, I woke up and I'll never forget the moment where I did X, Y, and Z. If you're not sharing that story, even just saying, for me, this work is really about blank, right? That's what I care about, and this is why. Because when I was growing up, we didn't have that, and it just didn't feel right. And ever since then, I've tried to, it could be that's a story right there, and it can be very simple and to the point. So I would encourage people to really start with that values work. And I'll just say one more cheap and affordable option is our book. It's really, we took our curriculum that we've been working with since 2011 and honing and crafting, and we try to make it as accessible as possible. It's like 112 pages. It's $12. It's accessible on online outlets, but I encourage people to go to your local spot, and if they don't have it, have them order it. It's available all over the world. So this has anything. It's all of our good stuff and none of the stuff you don't need. So I would encourage people to do that, and there's a lot of work around values in here. So just to plug that one more time, and not just to plug the book, but it really is a powerful and affordable and accessible resource for people.
Yeah, and yeah, that's great. That's great. You've given us so much to work with and so much insight. Thank you so much, Julian. That concludes our interview, and we really appreciate you for taking the time. I know you have a little son, so it's hard to carve out an hour to join us today.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. I want to appreciate both of you. Great questions, some questions I haven't been asked before. So I just totally appreciate you all's commitment to excellence with this podcast. It was a really great interview for me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Did you like this video? If so, share with your friends and be sure to follow us on social media. And if you want even more resources, be sure to sign up for our email updates on our website, traipsingglobal.com. Keep learning new perspectives, keep being inclusive, because it will make the world a better place for you and for everyone else. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on another episode of the Traipsing Global on Wheels podcast hour.